everyone for the incredible response to the content. And I want to thank Zenny62 Media Vloggers for their incredible work. If you want to vlog with us, we are got open positions and we are paying. So give me a shout at Zenny at zenny62media.net. Having said all that, it is my pleasure to introduce my friend Isaac Kos-Read. Isaac is the creator of Salsa at the Lake. He is also a communications expert for community organizations, has done outstanding work for the mayor of Oakland and other people in Oakland as well. And but this is his crown jewel, and I think it's fair to call it that. This, folks, if you've never seen it before, is Salsa at the And I have to say this, it's a bit of a, that is heck of fun. And I am absolutely, totally in need of salsa lessons, having tried to take them twice, once with the city of Oakland, and mainly to, go with this lady that I thought was interested in me, but that's kind of how it works, isn't it? Welcome.
Everything under the sun.
I only live blocks from the lake and the columns, so I have my own, story about how I saw it come to pass, but I don't know the official story. How did Salsa by the Lake start?
Yeah, thanks. Great to be here, Zenny. Good to see you in this very hip and modern platform of live streaming. Salsa by the Lake began in 2007. It was the springtime. I don't remember the exact day. This was like before we cataloged everything in our lives on social media. And I was standing by a living room window looking out at the lake. The springtime is such a beautiful time of like life coming into being. And I looked out at the water and I said, man, wouldn't it be great to be back out dancing like that in Havana, where my wife and I had just gotten back from in early 2007. We went in late 2006, came back early 2007. And then I kind of had a reflective moment and I said, why is it that we go elsewhere to do what we really love? Why not do some of that right here in our own backyard? We need some of that energy here. And I looked down at the lake and, how beautiful it is along the sidewalk. And I said, the area that rings Havana is called the Malecón. The board, it means boardwalk, literally. And I said, we got a Malecón right here in Oakland. So let's go down and dance on the Malecón, because the Malecón in Havana is a place where people come together. It's where, people might find a mate. People might do some, play some music. It's a place of social gathering. And I felt inspired, and so we grabbed our boombox, filled with D batteries. 8 D batteries is what it took. It was a tiny boombox, but emailed some friends.
I remember seeing that.
I bet, yeah. And this is we emailed some friends where this was pre-social media, really. And I grabbed my binder, my booklet of CDs, because of course that's what I played. And my wife and I started walking down by the lake, and we're like, is this a good spot? Is that a good spot? Should we do it here? Trying to find the right spot that we would kind of have a little bit of a place to dance without being in people's way. Because, it's a community down there and you got to maintain that balance. And so we were walking along and we headed toward the Grand Lake area and we stumbled upon the pergola. And, the pergola has that really wonderful combination of what I call, I guess, stage and throughput, if you will. So there's a way you can stop and pause there and do something, play music, dance, whatever. But people are still able to run by or walk by, or if people want to watch, they can sit and gather. And so it has a really nice, feng shui for that. And that's how it began back in 2007. And then, just boom, steadily grew from there. It was something that this was before the Measure DD project that closed down that extra road that was there. It was really weird. Whereas now it's a brick pathway. A lot of people don't remember that was the actual road.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, I remember it was El Embarcadero, I think it was called. And then there was this effort to sort of change it to what it is now. But what I in particular remember, correct me if I'm wrong, is I think the first time you did it, you had like 2,000 people out there. The response was incredible.
No. Well, there's several. So there's a couple different things. The real Salsa by the Lake begins this just really sort of informal way. Around that time, through I don't know my work and involvement in Oakland, I'd become connected to the founders of Oaklandish.
Yes.
And yes. I think this was something you were involved in those early days. This was probably like 08, 09.
Yeah,
I think was
really help to get the word out about Oaklandish. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the idea of doing things like dancing and listening to music on the lake is hardly anything new. And even I think there was even maybe some, I don't know that there was ever an iteration of salsa dancing on the lake as a regular formal thing, but certainly, lots of dancing outside on the lake. And so Oaklandish said, hey, would you want to do a big event with live music and everything? And we actually did that, but that year we did it over at the Grand Lake Theater at Splash Pad Park, because it's when you get to that level of event with generators and all that stuff, it becomes harder to do sort of informally on the lake. But yeah, for that we had a huge turnout. But that was in part because it was as much an Oaklandish event as it was a Salsa by the Lake event.
Yeah, and I remember being like, okay, candidly, I was like, well, that's cool. I'll check it out one day, right? And then that crowd, I was like, geez. And then I was thinking, I got 2 left feet. Oh no.
Hey, we welcome everybody out there. And the best way to learn anything is you just got, if you love it and you go out and do it. I believe everybody has rhythm ultimately. People don't believe it, but I had no idea how to dance. I did not grow up dancing. I was exposed to music. I was exposed to sports. So I had some, physical training, musical training, which I think are important or helpful. But I couldn't dance merengue, which is like the most basic Latin rhythm there is. 1, 2, 1, 2. And salsa was completely beyond me. And up until, even when I was an early adult, and I had taken one salsa class, and therefore, there was a moment when I was like, well, maybe I know how to dance salsa, but I quickly realized, like anything, you also know what you don't know. And you realize where you sit in like this really elongated spectrum, if you will, of knowledge, and that you're like at the super baby level. But anyways, yeah. So salsa is fantastic. It grew a lot. We've always, part of the magic, if you will, of Salsa by the Lake, and why it's had such just like a net positive for a lot of different people, is that it's serendipitous. It's not on a schedule, and that's annoyed a few people, but for the most part, what it has allowed to happen is for it really to feel good when it happens, because we respond to what the weather's like. We respond to what else is going on in the community. Like, we're not going to plan an event when there's a great band in town that everyone's going to be wanting to go to and might be tired from dancing for that, or because there's another festival that's happening at the lake and we want to respect that community space and wouldn't want to be like, yeah, well, Salsa by the Lake is ours to do every Sunday. And so that has made every Salsa by the Lake a little bit unpredictable. We don't usually announce them like more than 3 or 4 days in advance, but everyone ends up feeling like, wow, we really, we needed that.
If I may, on top of that, I didn't mean to say that there was an off-putting, in fact, regarding my lack of talent. I got out there in spite of that. And I tell you who actually got me out there was Rose. So I used to work, Rose and I worked for then Oakland Mayor L.U. Harris.
Oh, cool.
And she grabbed me, she goes, come on, Zinni, let's go. And you can't refuse Rose, okay? And so she basically taught me how to lead.
Good to know.
But what I love about, you were talking about how it was, from your perspective, I guess being, part of the woods, if you will, it seemed like it was irregular. But I'll tell you, what I love about Sundays and Salsa by the Lake was, even though I wasn't in it, just to go by it and know that it was there, it was like a marker to the week, and not was, but is, I think, even during the pandemic, and we'll get to that. That's, but pre-pandemic, it was just so much a part of the culture. There was Salsa by the Lake, and then there was, I think Kana had something going on, and there was this like cool, like Sunday rhythm in around by the lake, right? It was like, wow, this is nice, man. You go to Newbie Allen's place and all this stuff, and uh, you know,
The good old days. Yeah, I miss it like crazy. I moved to this area because I loved that energy, um, sensed it, tried to honor it with an event. And even though like I am maybe a catalyst doing the event also just attracts such good people, like every age and race and country and language. And I mean, the full diversity of our community gets out there, and no one cares, like you said, if you're shaking left and right or right and left or front and back. And also, families come out there now. Over the last several years, there's already the next generation. Like, my child comes out there. Other kids in the salsa scene come out. People who we met growing up in the salsa scene now are having kids, and they're starting to meet each other. It's a real community.
how did you come to Oakland, by the way? Because I realized, where are you from originally?
Yeah, I grew up born in Denver, but not a lot of people necessarily know that. But I was just because my father he was a doctor, he was doing his residency there. But I grew up in Southern California. Grew up in a place where the best place my parents could afford could afford a house that had good public schools. And that was Torrance Unified. And Torrance is, a small suburban strip mall kind of town that sits between where LA is, oddly not on the ocean, but it's a river city. And then all the cities that surround LA, and Torrance is one of those. And so it's a community of refineries. There's a lot of oil industry down there. It's a community of aerospace industry was huge. And in its latest economic energy was the home base for Honda and Toyota of North America. It's a very a super working class community, although it definitely has pockets that kind of trend more or less one way or the other. And so I grew up down there, and I went to public schools down there my whole life. At one point, we moved to San Pedro, which is LA is divided up into 15 council districts, and the one that is San Pedro is the southernmost, and literally it's like down here is LA, and then a little strip, and then the rest of LA is all up here. So 14 city council districts up here, and then there's this little LA. So San Pedro is a port city like Oakland. Quite diverse. I mean, it's the home of the Port of Los Angeles, and that's the only reason it's part of LA is because it was home to the largest port in the Western Hemisphere. And so it's got that interesting combination of a rich history of fishermen villages from the Dalmatian coast in Croatia, and then old Japanese fishermen from the old Japanese community down there, a huge Latino population, all mixed up, but like other places also facing gentrification and other forces. I started down there, found a job with a public affairs firm that was like how I kind of my first real job. That represented museums and science centers and classroom-based charter schools and water districts and cities. And I was like, wow, this sounds great. You get to advocate for, local government and nonprofit organizations, basically. And we did state and federal lobbying. And so one of our first clients was the Discovery Science Center. And similar somewhat is the Chabot Space and Science Center and the Children's Discovery Museum of San Jose. So I used to come up to Oakland for clients. Now I had gone to school in Northern California. I'd gone to school over at on the other side on the peninsula, but I would come over and visit my my high school girlfriend who went to Berkeley. And I hadn't ever focused on Oakland just because I was trying to get to Berkeley because that's where my girlfriend was, or I was trying to get back to school because that's where school was. But when I came upon Oakland, it just spoke to me. It spoke to me at a level that it's cliche now to say it, but it's cliche for a reason. It really is true. It shows up consistently as one of the most diverse cities in the country. Kind of trading places with Long Beach, interestingly, which by the way is like the neighbor to San Pedro down in Southern California.
I didn't know that.
And then the lake specifically was like this amazing combination of water, like living, breathing water, tidal water, ocean water. But it wasn't overly manicured. Like my brother who went up in China, he lived on a lake in Beijing. Beijing, of course, 22 million people, massive metropolis, but it was a historic lake. But the lake was like cordoned off with a wall, and you had to pay like, it was a minuscule amount, but like, let's say 10 cents to get in to see the lake. And it was, in my taste, overly manicured. It didn't have a natural energy to it. Whereas the Lake Merritt, for 150 years, is one of our nation's first wildlife refuges. And so that's an amazing thing. And so I fell in love with Oakland. I fell in love with the lake, and I moved up here in 2004 to set up our Northern California office, because by that time we had started working with the city of Oakland. I was the city of Oakland's lobbyist for a while. The city of Emeryville, the Oakland School for the Arts Fox Theater project I worked on. I've just been involved in so many different things in Oakland over the years. And then so I really put down roots in 2004, and then put down even firmer roots when I bought a house in 2006, also on the lake. So I've been there ever since. Been here ever since.
I have to explain. I was chuckling because I go back to '74 in Oakland, and I can remember when the lake was not at all paved, and the areas on the other side on Lakeshore didn't have sidewalks. It was dangerous to walk on a number of areas. And then we had the landscape lighting assessment district and the subsequent construction that has produced what we have today. So that's why I was chuckling, because I remember when you didn't want to walk around the lake. And it's amazing that we've come as far as we have. And we didn't have the pergola then. I mean, all of that design that Salsa at the Lake has so wonderfully adorned with its activity, came out of those assessment districts and everything. But how are you all getting?
The pergola was there since like for 100 years, but the manicuring of the area, the improvement of the area definitely has changed. For me, it really dates back to 2002 when Oakland voters passed Measure DD. Right. That was a huge milestone and it influenced my thinking about like, wow, this area is about to get a lot of attention and investment. And it was a plan that also seemed to really boil up from the community. Actually, the current executive director of the Port of Oakland, Danny Wan, was then the council member. And I believe he was instrumental in with a lot of other people in the community.
I went together. Nancy Nadell really
that funded that. And it was clear from the beginning that even though I think it authorized 192 something million dollars in capital investments,
yep,
it was known from the time that it was going to tap into state and federal funds that would help match it. So that really we're talking like several hundred millions of dollars have been invested around the lake over the last decade.
Yeah. And that came out of it. I want to give props to Nancy Nadell, who was a council member, and also to a degree, Natalie Bateman just prior to that. And they laid the groundwork for that, because prior to what you see now, we had, I go back to the festival at the lake, and that's really what you're doing is the best thing we have. We had the festival at the lake. That's another history we could talk about for hours that I covered when I was with my first columnist job was in the Montclarian, right? But what you're doing is, I think in terms of Oakland culture, if there's such a thing as trying to regurgitate a legacy through the soul of people who've been around and who remember and want to, maintain that feeling, I think what you have is what a lot of us enjoyed about Festival at the Lake, but lost. And, what you have maintains that. And having said that, how are you all doing during the pandemic? How does it all work, man?
Yeah. Well, so on the Festival of the Lake concept, by the way, I do have to acknowledge that I remember, I've heard stories about it, and I've maybe seen a couple gritty old clips from probably VHS that's been transferred over. And it clearly reached, it was wild. It was big. But I've heard a lot of people reminisce about it, but that predates my time. Although I wonder.
Go ahead.
I was going to say we could park the question of is how relevant is that history to what is actually happening today as well? Because I do think that there might be some, at some point if something gets too big, it can get too big, and it can kind of burst at the seams. But we don't need to go there right now.
Yeah.
You asked me a question, which was, oh, how are we surviving the pandemic? Oh
I was
man.
going to say, just to wet the whistle, people, real quick though, and I want to have you back to. But what happened was that there was the problem is the festival late ended at 6 o'clock, and the kids needed something to be between 6 and 8, and that's when the riots occurred. And I covered the whole thing. It was during the NBA Finals with the Lakers and the Bulls, and everything from a pregnant woman on the corner of Perkins and Grand being arrested by the Oakland police and thrown into the car. And I was writing about it as it was happening. I mean, I could talk about it all day. It was, but yeah, it's sorry because I was. Ugh. I mean, you want to see shoulder to shoulder Oakland police sweeping people off Grand Avenue and like a human broom. I saw it. That's what was going on. It was before YouTube. So,
yeah, not a pretty history.
No, not at all.
So how are we surviving COVID? Well, I mean, of the activities in life that are going to be severely limited by a pandemic, dancing is like right up there. So we were actually early. We were just about. I had created already my playlist for 2020 Salsa-By-The-Lake. Every year I kind of curate what I think are like the best new songs that kind of fit with the vibe outside. And we were all set to go, and then the pandemic hit, and we were among the first like communities that said, you know what, this is serious. We got to shut it down. And there was no more, not only because Salsa-By-The-Lake is one manifestation of a much larger and richer Afro-Cuban dance community in the Bay Area. And so, you know, there's like regular nights on Wednesdays, regular nights on Thursdays at different locations in Oakland and San Francisco. And everyone, the consensus was like, we got to shut it down. So we went into, you know, a pretty hardcore lockdown. Mind you, so it's 2020. That means that for the last 20 years, this is probably the longest I've gone without like a night out dancing. That's how big a part of when you're a dancer, like it's your thing. Like you know, other people, whatever your hobby is, you know how it is. It's what you do. You need something at least once a week, if not more frequently, where it's like, okay, that's my thing. I'm doing it. And so that's all gone. Early on, there was that interesting mixture of optimism, like, oh, we're crushing the curve and we're doing this right, and it's not that hard. And you know, people did some creative collaborations and sent around music videos that were like, "Can't wait to dance with you again," and you know, there was a lot of that romanticism. And then the grind, you know, started to settle in, the politicization of everything. Honestly, we're not just dealing with COVID, like the whole George Floyd thing. And when that exploded, that I can't quite say it tore through our community, but it was like another huge weight. It was the first time I posted a picture of George Floyd when he was a bouncer at a Latin club, like a Latin club or whatever in, I forget, Minneapolis or something. I forget. It was up, you know, in that area. Mm-hmm. And a bachata group out of DC that's connected to our like worldwide Afro-Cuban dance community said, we were there. That's us, that we're in that picture. This could have been one of the members of our community. And of course it absolutely could have been one of the members of our community. And so, you know, I felt it was necessary to say that and say like, this is unacceptable. And, you know, we need to stand up for Black lives. And so that post got an amazing amount of attention and response. Cause you know how, you know, Facebook tells you if you're a group administrator, like what generates the most interest. And that was the most we'd ever had on a post. And so that wasn't necessarily surprising to me because our community really is like, it is an Afro-Cuban dance community. It's not just a Cuban dance community. It's certainly not a salsa dance community. Those would be gross oversimplifications. It is a community that is not possible without the existence of African energy, African music, dance, you know, infused through the Caribbean, but like African, and like still people to this day, the majority of the people who are culture holders of this music would be considered Black. Anyway, so that created an additional stress on the community in the middle of the pandemic. And it did point out that there are some people in our community who don't necessarily agree. Or there's the mixture of everything. I mean, there's all different forms of racism. They're ultimately racism. There's people who wouldn't necessarily accept the premise or embrace the premise that the music we dance is not possible without African people and music and energy. I don't know how that's possible, but maybe some people can hold those beliefs. And what's great about it is also, like, one of the things that has always enchanted me about Cuban music is that Cubans in particular are quite aware of this. What makes their music amazing is not just the African part of it. It's also the part that they learn, what could be overly simplified as the quote unquote European part. Like they were also trained in Soviet style education and learned classical music. And so one of the things that makes Cuban music, in my opinion, a notch above like other forms of salsa, for example, is the artistry in it is artistry that is rooted in a phenomenal combination of like classical training, African polyrhythmic training, and just rigorous training. Anyway, sorry, I ramble.
No. That's deep, because it caused me to wonder how has gentrification impacted salsa at the lake? Because you're talking about certain attitudes, and I was thinking about how your community adjusts with change around it, right? Has it been impacted by people coming in who are, new to Oakland, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, sure. Although interesting, there's so many different complex elements to that. So it's grown, right? So just at a base level, it started with 12 of us. And now there's, however you want to measure it, there's 7,500 people on Facebook, but some of those are bots and some of those are international. And there's like 5,000 pretty hardcore members, but even those are some international people. There's probably like 300 regular people who come through. And anyway, so it's grown a lot, and it's very different when you're talking to your 12 friends and saying, hey, let's go dance on the lake, than when you're saying, hey, dance community, come out on the lake, to then that next level of like, world, come by the lake. And
that's a good DJ voice.
Yeah. And the equipment has progressed. Like, we went from a boombox to, I bought one of those first like speakers that you could roll that had a docking station, and those faded really quickly because the sound quality wasn't that good. And then we got like one good speaker, like a really nice speaker that we put on a pole. And we powered it with battery, like a battery pack. I lost you there.
I'm still here. Yes. You were saying you had a battery pack and power.
Yeah. So then we got. Okay. The physics of the dance floor is that, it's sound waves coming out. So the more people, the sound, is harder to hear further away from the speakers. Mm-hmm. And so you having to expand bigger. Well, if you spread them out, you need longer cords, and then you need a better energy source, because that also, after 3 hours, there were one or two times where even after 3 hours of dancing outside, which is a lot of time spent dancing outside in the sun, that was like a max. A lot of people arrive late. I'd be dancing for 3 hours, but other people would be arriving, an hour and a half in and say, okay, I'm ready for a party. And at the end of it, they're like, hey, come on, what are you doing shutting down my party? It's like, well, we've been out since 2. And this is not back to your point about like, even with the lake the lake festival at the lake, it's like, it's one thing if you schedule a party from like, 2 to 5, if people come from 2 to 5, but if people show up at 4 and are ready for the party to start by 5, and then go till you're in for a wild ride, right? So, anyway, so the part of it has been the growth. Now, a lot of people I have seen in the community are people moving over from San Francisco. They're like, they're people who, and sometimes it's not so much like, there's this metaphor of like, I don't know, a tech invasion. sometimes it's people who got priced out of San Francisco. In fact, I'd say a lot of the time it's people who got priced out of San Francisco. A lot of the nonprofit community that is active in Oakland like got priced out of San Francisco. And so there'd be people who say, well, I used to live in San Francisco, now I'm here. Dance teachers, dance community members who were part of that exodus. And the whole, like, all the dance events slowly started migrating more toward the East Bay. And then I'd say,
I know in San Francisco.
What's that?
Bartenders I know in San Francisco, like at Kells, they now live.
Yeah.
Adams Point.
So, and then they were like, wow, this is great. This is a cool outdoor, venue that's fun and safe and family friendly and healthy and all that stuff. So it attracted people. And then the other thing that probably changed over time was, I guess, more stuff started happening around the lake. And so early on, we were the only game in town. There was no drum circle. There was no capoeiristas. There were no the slack line kind of people. Mm-hmm. There wasn't really that new workout group over by the
by the bars over there.
Exit, yeah. What else? There's all these new Lindy at the Lake, a group that does Lindy, got started at the lake last year, which is they're cool. I mean, all these groups are for sure the sort of the barbecue and while black stuff at the lake. So there wasn't any of that, and so it was like, well, we would go out and do an event. Periodically, we would run into some random group that had reserved the space, which would be really funny. Like, I think there's like I'm feel bad saying this, but I don't know exactly, like a druid pagan group that like on the winter this like or whatever, they always reserved the space. And if we showed up in conflict with them, we went somewhere else, because if someone says they've got the space, we're so much part of this community. This isn't about, like, it really is a public space. And for me, that means like there's official public ownership, and then there's like the just basic human dignity of sharing public space.
If I may, the one thing that bothers me about those exchanges is I've always used Salsa at the Lake is for everybody. And the other group you mentioned, some of them, not all, but the ones in particular, I don't want to name names, but they act like, you don't belong. It's like our thing. No, and that, I think there ought to be a pecking order. In other words, you all are for everybody. So, hey, come in, salsa for a little bit, and then do your thing. That's just me.
Yeah. I mean, it is unfortunate that bullies can win out in a system like we've got now. And I wish people were more, willing to engage and be less sort of like black and white about things and compromise and empathize, really, right? Because, let's say there's this group that I mentioned that honors the summer solstice. Well, that's their dancing. That's their thing that's really important. And if they went through the trouble, which, boy, it is a lot of paperwork and whatnot to get approval to do an event, like actually get a permit for a space, they must take that really seriously, and I got to respect that. And how much skin is it off my back if I got to move 200 yards away to do some dancing? Like, I don't feel like that's something you can impose on somebody. Mm-hmm. But I would say that it does feel that a lot of people feel differently out there on the lake.
Yeah. I personally think the city should figure out how to just say, this is salsa at the lake, sanction it. And then, because it really is for everybody. And it's a great place to go if you want to meet a great girlfriend, guys. I'm just, for those who, I'm just saying. It might get me in trouble, but
or whatever other friend you want. There's a lot of, dancing is a great way to connect with other human beings in a very human way. One of the things that makes this pandemic so hard is that we are animals. We need to see each other, right. Breathe each other's air, smell each other. Maybe we're not even conscious that we're smelling each other, but like the science that people are understanding about the level of complexities of microbiology just on the human body alone, it's amazing. And so dancing is a way for people to deeply, deeply connect.
Right. And you can't do it on Facebook. It's like, or any other medium. You got to be at some point out there, and you guys make it happen. I think more than anybody else in Oakland. and done it for a long, long time. So Isaac, I want to have you back because we could talk for a long, long time. It could roll into the Festival of the Lake and roll into this and roll it.
Well,
you can roll and dance, right?
If you want to wrap, I do think it's worth noting before we do.
Sure, yeah, please.
Issues on the lake are coming to a head in a way that I don't think are good for anybody, really. And I really hope that, first and foremost, I hope we're able to, if you'll excuse the cliche, keep the peace. Mm-hmm. Although some people would say, well, the peace has already been violated, and there is some truth to that in multiple ways. But
can you elaborate for those who may not know what we're talking about, like the social distancing thing I think you're probably referring to? Or
well, I mean, basically over the last several years, and particularly this year, the level of noise, traffic, trash, everything down at the lake has gotten out of control. I mean, physically dangerous to the point where anybody, including some of the people who are down there, if they lived in the area, would not tolerate this in their own neighborhood. I don't care if they live in Deep East Oakland or in Walnut Creek or in Sacramento. Like, no one would tolerate what has been going on in the lake, essentially 3 days, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, every weekend for the last several weekends. And there's a lot of blame to go around in terms of how we got here. Pandemic just in general, like it's hard to process things and do things and take care of business. Lax enforcement, and then how do you suddenly enforce something that you haven't been enforcing for a while? People are all cooped up and worked up and angry for multiple reasons, and so there's just more stress and angst in society right now. Inequality, which that's a long, deep issue to deal with right there. So there's a lot going on. But I don't think it's going to help anybody or serve anybody if things continue to escalate. And so there was going to be a hearing, for example, to put a very specific point on it, yesterday before the Parks and Recreation Advisory Commission, which I serve on.
Right. Yeah, right. What happened?
Well, unfortunately, sign of the times, the Zoom account that was set up for the call only had a capacity of 100. And the city, of course, has access to other accounts that are like the maximum account where you can have, well over 1,000 people. But it was quickly capped out, and it was realized that we realized we couldn't have the meeting and somehow take public comment if we didn't know how many people were actually coming to comment and who got on first, et cetera. And so we just decided the fairest thing to do was to postpone the meeting a week. So next Wednesday, that's August 19th, right? Wednesday, August 19th at 4:30 p.m. You can find it on the Parks and Rec website, find it on the city's website. There will be a Parks and Recreation Advisory Commission meeting that will be dealing with at least two important items. The hot button item is what's going on at the lake and the question of whether there should be any sort of vending at the lake in some form at all. That's number one. Number two is also super important. Back in March, Oakland voters passed what's called Measure Q, which provides millions of dollars a year in funding to improve park maintenance. And everybody knows, no matter how you feel about issue number one or any other issue out there, the parks are not in a good state. The bathrooms are horrendous. There's a lot of issues. And it's not just about the lake, because Oakland has over 100 parks and recreation facilities across the city. So the question is, how do you ensure good oversight over that money in a way that's also synchronized with the other work related to Parks and Rec? And so it was determined that the best strategy would probably be to have the Parks and Rec Advisory Commission be the oversight agency for Measure Q funding. So both of those will be on the docket next Wednesday. I encourage everybody to tune in. It'll be a virtual meeting, and I am quite sure that the city is going to have a Zoom account that has a lot of capacity. And it will be a long meeting, by the way. Yes, exactly. Fingers crossed. It'll be a long meeting. Chances are it could go 4 to 5 hours or longer. Who knows? But it's going to be a real airing of the issues. And I hope people just really bring thoughtful, empathetic, reasonable ideas to the table in a way that hopefully, the rhetoric also needs to be, I think, toned down from all sides. That's the truth. We're all human beings. We all need basic, things to survive. And anyways, those are my thoughts.
Isaac, I'm gonna come back soon, man. I'm gonna get you back here. God
Sounds
bless
good.
you.
Great to see you. Take care.
On in the background. Hold on a second. Everybody, we'll have John Jones at 7:30 on Eastern time, which is 4:30. Talk about the Oakland Police Commission. Subscribe to Zenny62 on YouTube and bookmark oaklandnewsnow.com if you haven't done so. We also have Oakland. We'll have a lot of Oaklands. We'll see you. Stick around, Isaac. Thanks again.
Peace.
And remember, check out Salsa by the Lake.